Welcome, everybody, once again to another episode of Writers and Fighters, a podcast. I'm your host, AJ Ortega, and every week on this show I interview someone involved in writing or someone involved in fighting. This is episode 36, and I have a writer on today. Danika Stegeman LeMay is a poet and the author of the book Pilot. It's a collection of poems derived in several ways from the television show Lost. I bought the book and read it in one sitting. It's an enjoyable book, and so the link's going to be in the show details and on writersandfighters.com. But before we get to that interview with Danika, over the weekend there was a UFC card, and there were some good fights. The main event was UFC veteran Edson Barboza versus Giga Chikadze, and I was really looking forward to this one because Edson Barboza has been one of my favorites in the UFC for many, many years. He has a highlight reel that is rivaled by very few, lots of memorable bouts. And I've also caught Giga Chikadze's last 3 fights or so and really seen the effectiveness of his kicks, and he comes from a kickboxing background. And he's very much known for a left kick to the liver called the Giga kick. It's just a left kick to the liver, but we call it the Giga kick now. But because both of these guys were known for their kicks, I was honestly worried that they'd break a leg like Conor McGregor or Anderson Silva or Chris Weidman, especially because they were checking the kicks that the other was throwing. And Giga was a slight underdog, but ends up winning not by a kick, but by an overhand right, followed up by ground control and some submission attempts that got pretty close, and then follow-up shots to Barboza's head, causing the ref to step in. And so Barboza lost, and he was slightly favored, but Giga took the win, and he's coming up, and so he's well into the top 10 now, and so I think a title shot is coming up soon, within a year and a half for him. Then in the boxing world, YouTuber Jake Paul took on former UFC welterweight champion Tyron Woodley. And this is where my notes for my intro end. And so my notes are ruined because I was kind of counting on Tyron Woodley winning, which he didn't. Before we get to that, though, there was other real fights on this. This was a Showtime card. So there was Tommy Fury was on the undercard. Montana Love put on a great show. Danielle Dubois is like 16-0 with 15 knockouts and got a first-round knockout. And then there was Amanda Serrano, which is one of the best fighters ever. Like, she's held belts in 7 different weight classes, which is more than De La Hoya and 1 less than Manny Pacquiao. And she won a very decisive, unanimous decision against a tough Mexican woman, Yamilet Mercado, and she just couldn't keep up. Amanda Serrano's on another level, and she was completely outclassed. Might have won 1 round if you're generous, you know. And so there's real fights here and opportunities for people to get their name out there. And so I just wanted to at least mention some of their names. But of course, speaking of names, Tyron Woodley is a huge name, as is Jake Paul, like it or not. So here we are talking about this match. Rather, I'm talking about this match. And for whatever reason, it does become this division between MMA fans and boxing fans. Tyron Woodley is a NCAA All-American wrestler. He's great at that. He's a great fighter, has a great right hand. But in this fight, Jake Paul did everything right. This is why it's not on my notes, because it's hard for me to say that. I was a fan of Tyron Woodley, and he lost his last 4 fights when he left MMA, left the UFC. He had lost his last 4 fights, but he was, a really dominant welterweight champion. Got a lot of criticism for being a boring fighter at times, but just a great athlete. And so it's frustrating to see somebody like Tyron put himself out there at this level where I was saying, everybody was saying, okay, well, he's a real fighter, so he should knock out Jake Paul. It should be a done deal. I thought so. But Jake Paul is training correctly. He is training very smart. He controlled the fight from the outside using his reach, utilized the jab. Tyron was not doing anything more than one punch at a time. He was not throwing combinations, whereas Jake Paul was. He was utilizing the distance and got in there with a couple combinations here and there. And when Tyron got close, Jake would tie him up. And he did not waver from this plan. He did not get frustrated. And to Tyron's credit, neither did he, but he didn't have any urgency either. And so Jake Paul won fair and square. It went to a split decision. I don't know what that one judge was viewing, giving it to Tyron Woodley 75-77. I don't know what match he was watching. I gave Tyron 2 rounds, maybe 3 if I'm being generous. And so again, it pains me to say so. But in any case, that's all I have to say. All I have to say is that Jake Paul executed a really smart game plan and really neutralized Tyron Woodley's power. Tyron couldn't get on the inside, so his power was neutralized. He landed one shot that was not completely clean, a little bit behind the ear, overhand right, that threw Jake Paul into the ropes. But aside from that, that was it. And that was the only round that he really won decisively. So Jake Paul proved he could go 8 rounds. His gas tank is not the best. He was tired, but he did it. And he won fair and square. Tyron was calling for a rematch. I think that's silly. I think it's time for him to take that money and go put his feet up. And yeah, you can't really talk after that performance. So in any case, so a little bit of a downer. You know, the bad guy wins, the heels win in this one, as it were, to use pro wrestling terminology, because it's getting kind of close. In any case, here is the interview with Danika Stegeman LeMay, again, the poet and the author of the book Pilot. She was a great conversation, so I hope you guys enjoy. All right, y'all, it is the interview portion of the show, the best part of the show, and I'm sitting here on Zoom with Danika Stegeman LeMay, author of the book Pilot. How are you doing, Danika?
I'm doing great. How are you, AJ?
I'm hanging in there. So tell the audience who you are and how you wound up on this podcast.
I am Danika Stegeman LeMay. I wrote a book called Pilot out from Spork Press. The book is a book of it's mostly erasure poems that are erasures from the television show Lost. And I wrote some of the poems using a FSBA's computer application, the machine poems.
Right.
And there are a few poems in the book. The interlude poems are just me. They're not erasures, but
right.
Yeah. And so I connected with you on the internet. I am friends with Micah Ruel, and
shout out Micah.
Yes, thank you very much, Micah. And I discovered you are a friend of Micah's as well, and a fan of Lost. So that's how we connected.
Yeah. I always, know a lot of writer people and stuff, and Micah's one of them, and she shares this cool book that she was admiring. And when I heard the premise that it, is a part of the premise of the book is that it has to do with the show Lost, which is like my favorite show. And so I was like, I got to talk to this person. And so I got your book and invited you on. So I thank you for coming on, but also thank you for writing this book. And I want to get to it. But first of all, I want to talk about how you come to write a book, and such an interesting one. But I want to know how we kind of got there. So when did you first start to get into writing and reading, and maybe poetry specifically? Was that something you always latched on to?
The very first writing I remember doing that wasn't as an assignment was actually children's books that I turned into my sixth grade teacher for Sticks of Gum. I wrote a story about a frog whose tongue got stuck to its back. I remember that being one.
Poor guy.
Yeah, I know. But shortly after that, I sort of found poetry as the genre and mode of writing that I enjoyed most. I kind of came to it through music. I really liked music and always connected with the lyrics particularly. And so I think I actually, when I started writing in my journal when I was 13, I was trying to write song lyrics. But I have been writing poetry basically ever since then. And I do a lot of erasure poems. And I was thinking a couple of weeks ago about how even from a young age, like when I was in high school, I really loved The Kids in the Hall. And I used to watch it on Comedy Central, like every night when it was on late at night. But I realized even then I was writing kind of erasure poems, like of Kids in the Hall, like characters. Like I remember writing a poem about that. And so it's always kind of been a part of my writing style.
Like incorporating the stuff that you're kind of consuming around you kind of finds its way into your writing, even at that age. Like, I mean, I guess what age are you around that time when you're incorporating this stuff into your poetry?
I would say I started incorporating it into my poetry around probably 17 or 18.
Oh, cool.
And I wasn't exactly conscious of doing it then, but even when I'm writing sort of a regular poem that I'm not setting out for it to be an erasure, I'm always taking materials that I'm reading or just the world around me, like spoken language or something spray painted on the side of a building, usually works its way into my poems.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think, getting these little nuggets of reality to put into our writing, and specifically poetry, it's a similar to how I approach it in a lot of ways. And you see something that's interesting, and you don't know where it's going to take you. Like a can of Sprite on a park bench that has lipstick on the rim. I don't know what that means right now. I might know next month or next year. But going into again these other characters and the characters from Kids in the Hall come from the world of writing as well, right? And so then you're injecting them into your writing, and then Lost as well. What were you reading aside from poetry, or were you just like stories? Did you read any like novels? Were there authors that you kind of latched onto early on?
Yeah, I really liked Arthur Rimbaud. I remember as a young person, around 17, 18, I would like take my tattered copy of Rimbaud and like go to a coffee shop and like read Rimbaud. I kind of latched onto the beats early on as well. Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, kind of anyone who had a lot of feelings. Sylvia Plath also.
Oh, sure.
I've always been a reader of fiction as well, but those are the poets I can think of that I latched onto early on, especially.
And so, did you ever write fiction?
So I attempted to write fiction as an undergraduate, and some screenplays as well. I have to admit, up until the last year or so, I had a hard time even writing a poem that was longer than, say, 15 lines.
Amen. I get you.
Yeah, since then, over the past year or two, I've started writing some hybrid work. So it's got a little bit more of a prose and more nonfiction, I guess, than fiction element to it. Cool. And the poems or the hybrid works are getting quite a bit longer, but still, 5 pages would be my maximum, I'd say. But so I love fiction and I still love to read it. And I especially love someone who writes a spectacular sentence, like Marcel Proust or Ray Bradbury writes really wonderful sentences as well. But that's kind of not necessarily my skill set. My mind kind of works in lines.
That's great. That's cool. I like that. So about the book, and so we get a little bit of your background. Clearly, you're a poet. Poetry is your thing. I'm always curious how poetry collections specifically come about. I imagine they're similar to fiction collections, but like, what was the genesis of the book? Were these like individual things you were kind of doing, incorporating the world of like Lost and the language of Lost and the writing from Lost? Was that like the goal from the outset, I guess is what I'm asking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the very first poem that I wrote, it took me about 10 years to finish the book. But the first poem, I hadn't set out to write a whole book of these lost poems. And I originally actually, my starting place was I was reading Wind, Sand, and Stars by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who wrote The Little Prince. And I loved it so much. If anyone out there has not read that book, it's wonderful. And I was very inspired by the book, and I wanted to use some of the language from it in a poem. And I was also really interested in that time. I was looking at Google Earth a lot, and I learned about, I can't remember where I learned about it, but the airplane boneyard at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, sure. Arizona. Yes. So I was looking at aerial photograph, like the Google Earth of the airplane boneyard. And for some reason, I can't remember why, I decided Lost was somehow related to what I was looking at, like this idea of like pilots and broken planes. Saint-Exupéry was a pilot, and that's what a lot about what Wind, Sand, and Stars is about, is him crashing with his navigator in a desert. But so I looked online and I found this wonderful community of people who had transcribed every episode of Lost awesome. Lovingly. Yeah. So I just took the very first poem, which is Pilot 1, ended up being kind of a mashup of Wind, Sand, and Stars, my own writing being inspired by the images of the Air Force Base, and language from the very first episode of Lost, the pilot. And you can read that version if you can get your hands on issue 1, volume 1 of Lowball, which was a journal that was edited by D.A. Powell. That original copy or version of Pilot is in there. But I ended up changing it for the book because
I love that.
Yeah. Tell me. Because I had made rules for myself when I decided, like, I was so delighted basically by these transcriptions made by the Lost fans, particularly the stage directions, because they're not the words written by the screenwriters.
Oh, wow.
They're basically the transcribers trying to describe what they're seeing on the screen. And it's this colloquial language that they've just like...
Right, because it's not exactly film script language. That's really fascinating. Because, wow, that's really interesting. Yeah. That changes the perspective a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and I loved the juxtaposition of these carefully sort of written scripts, which a lot of the content in Lost is, it's dramatic. It's about life or death kind of situations. And then there's these sort of asides that the transcribers are writing, like, we hear the monster sounds, or Saeed adds wood to a big fire. It's this juxtaposition between the simpler, like, common sort of tongue and like the more heightened language of the script were very, like, that rubbing against each other was interesting to me. And so basically I kind of decided to just continue with every episode. Originally I think in my mind had planned to do all 6 seasons, but that got a little, you can only do this. Yeah, you only do the same trick for so long. So the book does end after season 2, which felt like a good length for the book, and I felt like I had accomplished what I wanted to.
Yeah, you got in there before the seasons with the writer's strike, so I think that's okay.
Like, yeah,
and I do. Gets a little bit too weird even for
it does. Yeah, I do prefer the first 2 seasons.
It's so great.
Out of all of them.
That first season is tremendous. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and the way I ended up writing some of the poems, the machine poems is what I call them, with a computer application, is when I got to episode 8, I started feeling that I needed to escape my own word choices and my own mind in some way. And just by sort of good luck, I was friends with a lot of IT people who I worked with in the libraries when I worked at the U of M. And I talked to them about this idea of possibly making some sort of computer application that would choose the words from the script for me, so I could feed the words into this kind of machine and have it spit them out to me. And that I was able to realize that with one of the IT people who worked at the library. And I used it only for, for fans of Lost, I used it only for episodes 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, and 42 because they're
The
the
numbers.
numbers that are input into the machine.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that again, I like that you said you gave yourself these kind of parameters to operate under after and revisited that first poem, Pilot.
Yes.
I think that's really cool. And, because one of the things I love about poetry is that it seems, to me, it seems more open in whatever way than things like fiction or creative nonfiction, screenwriting. But then I always find myself when I'm working on a poem and trying to get it to whatever next level I think it should go to, I want to find a way to put parameters so I limit myself, right? And I have to, again, you use certain words or certain rhyme schemes or certain line breaks or even something like that. But going to the length of creating a computer program with the help of one of your friends to get the right words to force you into thinking differently about this project, I think is just a hyper unique and really, really awesome. I think that's a really cool story in terms of how this thing came to be. Yeah, it's another element that you don't count on when you read poetry collections, that a computer program helped me along on these poems,
Yeah. That's the kind of interesting thing about parameters or restrictions or boundaries too, is sometimes it
Boundaries are
can be
good.
really, really generative as well. Like even when you're sort of confining yourself, in some ways it helps me to find new ways of looking at things, and it helps open things out. And for me, I guess as a person and also a poet, there's always the struggle between sort of control and chaos, like just letting the words come out like this. That's sort of what some of the unraveling poems or the interlude poems are doing in the book too. Like it can't all be so tightly wound,
Yeah.
all of the language. So it's really the interplay between the two is interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love that first poem, the pilot, and also that the character, the pilot, the idea of a pilot flying the plane crash in episode 1, but also pilot episode, right? The language we use to describe the inaugural episode of a new television series. And so, again, putting us in that world of TV language, right? That this is coming from an artificial world that a whole bunch of other writers created and stuff like this. And I love that injection immediately in the first poem. I think it's awesome.
Thank you.
Who is your favorite Lost character? Since we're talking about Lost, and we get interesting voices throughout and stuff. Who's your favorite Lost character?
Yeah, I don't think this is a popular choice from talking with my own friends, but Benjamin Linus is actually my favorite character. Yes, Ben, the sort of leader of the others. I love a good villain just across the board. And I think Michael Emerson, who plays Benjamin Linus, is an excellent actor. Like it's amazing to me just the way he can change the mood of a scene just by moving his eyes or like changing the register of his voice just slightly. And I really think Ben Linus is like the perfect character for him to play. Like it's just like the best actor to play this character. It just like matches up in a really amazing way. And I also think some of his lines are just really funny. Like one of my favorite lines in the whole series is when the plane crashes and you kind of finally get to see the others witness this plane crash. And the others are having a book club, and Ben has apparently not been invited to the book club. And he says, well, I guess I'm out of the book club. It's like a very dramatic moment. And he's got a few lines like that. I think it's really funny. She's well written.
What an actor. Yeah. There's moments where just the way his eyes move or delivers a line without blinking or just says whatever sinister line with barely moving his fucking mouth, and it's like, whoa.
Yes.
It's very like this very understated, scary motherfucker in the show when he first shows up. It's like, what is this guy? No, that's a good choice. That's a really good sleeper of a choice right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask who your favorite character is, if you have a favorite?
Oh, sure. Like when the show first starts, I liked Sawyer. I fucking loved Sawyer being not likable, like quite not likable,
Yeah.
but funny as hell. Oh, funny as hell too. And so I was a big fan of him being hated on the show and antagonizing the other characters, the shitty nicknames he'd give people. I liked that. Again, good foil to the early main dude character. Fucking what's his name?
Jack.
Jack, of course, Jack.
Yeah.
And Jack, good foil to Jack, right? And so, but then later I like Hurley and Charlie. Hurley and Charlie. Yeah, I love them both. And Hurley I love because, I think he's a really good, cool representation of like the Mexican American generation that I'm part of. Like that just becomes part of this really, not this integral part of who he is, but it is his character, right? That Hugo becomes Hurley because of things like, you find out Cheech Marin is his dad in the show, like, and it's so on point in terms of like, that's a real guy. Those are like the guys I went to high school with. And he's just a fun, loving character. You can't hate him. He fixes the Volkswagen bus. I'm a Volkswagen guy. So like, I was like, oh my God, there's this Chicano guy on this fucking wacky sci-fi show. Cheech is his dad and they fix a Volkswagen. Like this cannot be real in this day. And it's such a good character and adds levity to lots of heavy shit in the show. His character adds a lot of levity. And you need that, like, in actuality. You need Hurleys in your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are my choices.
Yeah. It's interesting that you chose them too, because they're two of the characters who are the most fun to write, like to use their language.
Right.
Like I was so grateful for Hurley so many times because I could put a dude whoa into a poem, like to help just like give it another texture, lighten the mood. And I think Hurley is so lovable and important for a lot of the reasons you said too. Like, I don't know that there were a lot of characters that I had seen like Hurley before. So it seems important just in the real world as well.
Yeah, and again, the part of the idea of the casting, I think, of the show is that like when you get on an airplane, there's all sorts of people around you, right? There is Hurley next to you. There is John Locke next to you. There is Sawyer. And that they become these weird little symbols or almost archetypes of like showing this true diverse landscape of the people we're around all the time, but don't know their stories. And thus the narrative structure of Lost where we get like a Hurley-centric episode, right? A Saeed-centric episode. And that like, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, agreed.
Speaking of the poems and the voices and whatnot, what about reading one for us?
Yeah, I'll be happy to read one. This is from a Sawyer-centric episode, actually.
Ooh, Sawyer. Lovable asshole, man. Great.
Yes. So this poem is called Outlaws. It's one of the poems that was published in Sporklit. It's available online. There's a link to it on my website. But I sent this group of poems to Sporklit, which is the journal of Spork Press. And that's how I ended up getting a book contract. Actually, they loved the poem so much that they were like, Richard Sykin was the editor and said,
yeah, I saw the
name.
Do
you have more of these? Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So let me go ahead and read the poem. Outlaws. We hear the whispers. Son of a bitch. This will end with us running through the jungle, screaming and crying. You're all like shell-shocked. You say, I never, and then you never finish the sentence. I never steal. I never went to Disneyland. So we're in hell, huh? Take comfort. Someday this is all going to be a real nice shopping complex, or maybe an auto mall. I never been in love. I never wore pink. Even in the 80s. The whispers again. Don't make a sound. I'm not the one trembling, sweetness. I never suffer. I never disappear.
And so when you say that you got it from a Sawyer-centric episode, you got lots of different points of views in the poem. Is that only because of where you're drawing the language from? And so this is a Sawyer-centric episode, and I draw some language out of here, and so I guess, is that Sawyer's voice? Speaker of the poem kind of questions, right? Like, because one of the things, they're distinctly different throughout, right?
Right.
So tell me a little bit about your ideas on point of view with this project.
So another point of view is another reason I continued to erase these poems and continued with the project. Another thing that was really fascinating to me was how it's an ensemble cast, and the I and the you and the we belong to so many different people.
Okay.
And I have a difficult relationship with agency and the idea of like sort of pressuring a you with an I, like just as a speaker in a poem. And so I loved this idea of taking this sort of communal I and you that was very literal. Like sometimes an I is Sawyer's I, and sometimes it's Kate's, right. And sometimes it's Hurley's, and sometimes the you is addressing a ghost or a lover or an enemy or a friend. And so I intentionally wanted to use this material to play with those tensions and blur the lines between a like really specific I speaker and especially sort of like a autobiographical I and a you that addresses a specific you. In some ways, I do always mean the you to be the reader. The reader is complicit in anything, any horrors that are undertaken in the text. You sort of build meaning with the writer as you read the book. And so I think that's also true of the show. And that's part of the reason I was interested in using a show that's like from popular culture that was so well loved. I think it's the reasons that we love it and the ways that we see ourselves or don't see ourselves in particular characters is important to our sort of social fabric. And also just is interesting to me as an artist. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, 100% it did. And because there's some of these, and I think it's the interlude ones, where I think it's like, and I couldn't figure out like, and I did have that impression that the you is me reading this poem, and that the voice, in the poem was that of the writer / viewer of the show on the couch. I don't know if I was making that shit up or not, but that's kind of what I felt with some of these poems. It was really fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's definitely in there. You're not making that up.
Okay. I was like, this really loved the interlude cast. I loved that one. Would you want to read another one, or do you think that's good enough? You want to read another one? Did you have one?
Yeah, I can read another one. Let me read one of the machine poems because they're a little bit different.
Yeah, please.
And I made some poem videos, which is also something I've been getting into.
Oh, wow.
So if you go find, I made a video for this particular poem. So it's kind of like a collage
give me
video.
Links for everything.
Give me links. Yeah, I will. It's on my website, and I have a YouTube page. But let me go ahead and read it. Machine, walk about. It's night now. I'm sleeping by the trees. Matter rooted in the ground. Belongings are marks. Understand a sign needs transmission. The monster shakes out metallic. Reaction shot for rescue or after. We slit the dark with a love that pounds and opens on waking. Hear it knock. Flashlight signal of looking. I gave you what I have inside. Whatever treacherous woods wait here, know that what I steal, I mean enough. Renewal maneuvers the line. burn this memorial slowly.
The opening of each line, the beginning of each line, starts with the greater than symbol followed by a colon. Was that something the computer was doing as well, or is that the little prompt kind of thing, like where the cursor blinks and you got to type something in? Is that, tell me about that little stylistic choice there. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's if you were to look at the computer screen on the show where they type in the numbers, that's what it looks like on the side.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought.
Yeah. And it's like on an older sort of computer system, it's like a command.
Right,
so
like a command prompt.
When you're giving exactly a command prompt, when you're telling the computer to execute an action, that's what you put in first.
Yeah, definitely. And so in that way, those, aside from the title saying, machine and then blank, you also have this visual thing that shows you this is distinctly different than these other poems. And it leads to my next question, which is that you use different languages throughout. That being one of them, kind of computer code and computer language kind of stuff like that. Then you have like the language of like television and film. And then you have the, like, I believe, because I believe it was Korean. Is that true?
Yes,
okay.
It's Korean. Yeah,
there's some symbols there, and I'm not educated on that stuff, but I was like, well, Sun and what's her husband's name in the show?
Jin.
Sun and Jin, they're Korean, and I was like, these symbols I see in this one poem in translation must be the Korean characters. What about that idea of using multiple languages in this very traditional sense, Korean and English, and then like computer stuff, and then the language that we use in like cinematography, right?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So part of it is that I really wanted to honor the original material, and I love the idea of letting it help shape each poem, because they all kind of, or a lot of the episodes have different things to offer. So the episode or the poem with Korean in it is called In Translation, and that's one of the, in the first season, it's one of the episodes that really focuses on Sun and Jin. Sure. And so there's a lot of Korean and subtitles in that particular episode. And there's so many, especially for Sun and Jin, there is a lot of translation and Korean in the transcripts. And so I wanted to make sure I honored that and used it in at least one of the poems. So it's kind of like my interest in just the material, like the stuff of it.
Yeah.
Like I love it. And I kind of wanted to use it like making a collage out of physical materials. Like I wanted to make sure I incorporated the materials at my disposal. And that includes the sort of computer language also that we were talking about. And the, like the stage directions, like some of the other poems, there's one that's got agent in it because there's some kind of, I think it's probably a Saeed episode where there's like an agent, like a secret agent or something, having him do a sting operation. Yeah. And so I sort of used that partly because I wanted to honor that particular script, but also like it was such a coincidence, my interest in agency. And then so these words mean more than one thing. And so taking something and honoring it, but also then like turning it to my own purposes was also interesting to me. And I did want to, part of the goal of the book is to take this text and put it in my own language, even though it belongs to someone else, even though someone else originally wrote it, but also to show the seams. I wanted the seams to show because it is a taken language.
Sure.
And I didn't want to just plaster that over. And so I wanted some of these things like the camera coming in to be in it. And also to kind of point at the artifice of making a book in the first place. I like the idea of being able to see the seams.
I wanted to say the word.
So I wanted that in there.
I wanted to say the word artifice, but I didn't know if that was the right one. But yeah, that it makes us conscious that this is grabbed from this artificial world and this is constructed and you did stitch it together. And Yeah, and I think that's okay. That's was my attraction to the book, initially.
Right.
Um, I want to thank you for sending me the book and also for sending me a cool little button that I'm wearing right now that will move on to my motorcycle vest after this episode.
Great.
But I got this little chat book too, Co-Pilot. Tell me about this little chat book.
Yeah, sure. So often different people's experiences or different presses might be different, but it takes a long time when you finish a book, and then it takes a good 9 months or a year sometimes for the book to be made and to come out. And I was kind of anxious for the book to come out, and I was talking to my brother Christopher about it. And he has a background in bookmaking. He has made like hand-sewn children's books.
Sure.
And I also have an interest in bookmaking. So my brother suggested that we make this chapbook companion while I waited for the main book to come out, and we would hand make it. So I had a lot of material that didn't make it into the final poems because they just didn't quite serve the final version of the poem. But there were a lot of words or phrases that ended up on the cutting room floor that I still really enjoyed. And so I took some of those and kind of put them in a document. And then I wanted this project to be a little freer and have less constraint than the poems in Pilot itself. And so it's not all erased text, and it's from all different episodes across the 2 seasons. And so some of the text is just mine, but I kind of mixed it together and wrote this just short companion piece. And then in an afternoon, my brother and I just kind of assembled the chapbooks together. Yeah. And my husband is a screen printer, so I created the art that's on the front and back of Co-Pilot, and he screen printed that image for me. And we just did a small run of 50 books, which maybe we'll do a second run at some point. I meant for it to be kind of a companion, like almost like an actual co-pilot acts, I guess, in the cockpit, just like doesn't necessarily need to step in unless something's going terribly wrong. But also it's kind of like a beacon. There's a lot of flash or kind of lighthouse images in Co-Pilot. So
yeah, no, I love it. And I love another thing I was going to mention, I love the inscription because I insisted that you sign it for me and stuff. So I appreciate you sending me a signed copy. But you wrote a quote in here for me. You can't just type the numbers in. It doesn't work that way. And it's a really good choice for me. I love it. It does resonate with me a lot. But I'm curious about that line for you. You can't just type the numbers in. It doesn't work that way. What about that, like in the show and in your book and that sentiment?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. That's one of my sort of favorite lines in the book. And when I inscribe the books, I do try and change them for everyone and try like capture, sure. I don't know, capture something. So I'm glad that one resonated with you. But I guess it means for me, I am a bit of a perfectionist, and I which may come across in the form of the book. But it sort of, you can't just like fill a structure just for the sake of filling it. Yeah. You really have to, like, there has to be substance there too. And you have to feel it. And so it's both. It's kind of what I was talking about with the control and the freedom or the chaos earlier. It's like you can have this, like, build a beautiful house, but if you don't invite someone into it, if you don't sort of breathe life into it, then what are you left with? Wood, you can't just type the numbers in. It doesn't work that way. Like you have to, it has to be, something has to bring it to life. Yeah.
I think I feel something very similar when I hear that and I read that and take the context of the show into account, that like, you can't just go through the motions. You can't just fill in the blanks like it like life is Mad Libs or something, right? And hope that, it's just going to be okay. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. that there has to be, I think the word I'm looking for is intention, right? That there has to be intention as you kind of operate and punch these numbers in, or, quote unquote, punch these numbers in, whatever that means, that there has to be intent behind it, and it's not a surface fill in the blank operation here,
Right.
At
You
least
have to care.
Right.
And I think Robert Creeley said something in an interview once about, I think he was talking about Robert Frost and how the poems were very nice and all, but I don't know if I feel that he cares. And so it's like, it kind of reminds me of that. Like there has to be intention, and also like this sort of, I guess when you make art in any way, like that's part of the point for me, is like, you need to have your intent needs to be in the right place. And you have to put this, like, it matters. It's important. Like it's a connection with other people.
Yeah, I get something very similar too. I dig it. So we talked about your book, and we talked about the little companion to it. We're going to give people links to stuff as well. What else do you got coming on? Like, what other projects do you have going on poetry-wise?
Yeah, so many weird things, AJ. I just picked up a Rolodex at a flea market, like an outdoor flea market.
Neat.
I got hundreds of little cards from computer parts, mostly businesses in the Midwest from the late 70s, early 80s. But I am starting to work on that. I'm going to erase the side that has the text on it already, and on the other side I'm going to handwrite a sequence poem. I'm calling it Wheel of Fortune. So I'm excited to get started on that. I've got some sort of more traditional, like regular poems that I'm compiling into a book. I feel like it's nearly book length, and they're all kind of little machines. It's just sort of how I operate. Like I had a couple poems come out in the journal Afternoon Visitor in June, and one of them is called Rube Goldberg Machine.
Nice.
And it's like mimics the actions of an actual Rube Goldberg machine. So it's hard to describe.
You're like,
but
the bowling ball hits the cat and it jumps into the basket and knocks over the whatever.
Right. Yeah. So I'm working on pulling those into a book as well. I've got a couple more of those poems coming out in Leaving's Lit Mag soon, which I'm excited about. I have a project that's a little more personal than what I'm accustomed to putting out, called Ablation. That's about my mom. My mom had a heart defect, and also the glaciers melting. So that's really a feel-good book. But, kind of about my concern for the environment, and also like, and I should tell you the reason those are tied together is ablation is a heart procedure, and also a word that means like evaporation of a glacier. Okay. And I've got a book another book I'm going to erase called that I found at the thrift store called The Register of Household Possessions. It's kind of a thing that people used to do in the 70s or 80s. It's basically just a ledger that you're supposed to list like your belongings in for the insurance company.
Oh, wow.
But with a title like that, I think I'm going to put some ghost stories or something in there.
Hell yeah.
So I'm excited about that one as well. So lots of
you got a whole bunch of stuff going on. And again, all different and all weird, Danika, which is my kind of writing. So here's a question. There's an Instagram account called Taylor Swift as Books, and I think I only kind of get it, but I think I know I love it. I know I love it because I've been aware of it for a few months now. And so what is that? And I just so love that. I just love that. You got some love on that Instagram account. Yeah,
yes,
super dope.
Follow Taylor Swift as Books. Yes, on Instagram. That's run by Amy Lorraine Long, who is an author. Her book is Codependency, and I'm not going to remember what the press is right now. Cleveland. Okay. I think it's Cleveland. But I believe she started it in January, maybe, and it's really taking off. But basically, she finds, so she takes a cover of a book and like what it looks like and captures its energy, and then finds a picture of Taylor Swift that like matches the book.
And
And
so
it's not
good.
just like matching the colors, but like the one that she chose for bio, I was so impressed because it just like captures the whole spirit of the darn book without, and the colors match, and it's really amazing.
It's a really fun account, and again, it'll pop up, and I'll be like, that is Taylor Swift as this book, and it's like it's just a really really cool. It's just a really cool account. So I was glad that you got some love on that.
Yes, and it's they're also so good about like anyone who's been on Taylor Swift's books, just like promoting any projects or anything. Like it's so nice to like. It's what's amazing about the writing community is like the way that we all can support each other. And
no, I was really thrilled. I was
the
really
spirit
thrilled.
of that.
I was really thrilled that they added you to their stories and tagged my podcast and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. So we'll give them some love. Awesome. Here's a question. This is the Writers and Fighters podcast. Clearly you're a writer. You are a poet. You're working on all sorts of writing projects. Clearly you're a writer. But do you have any experience or interest in any kind of fight stuff? Because that's the other half of my show.
Yeah. I am a bit of a pacifist, I'm going to admit. I do yoga and I meditate. And it was interesting because around the same time that you contacted me to possibly do this podcast, I was thinking about it, looking into, there's a dojo in my neighborhood that does Aikido. And so I think I haven't had a chance because some are so busy, but I think I might do like a practice session there. Oh, yeah. I have taken one women's self-defense class.
Great. Great.
Which was great. And I recommend for everyone. And when I was a kid, Bloodsport was one of my and my brother's favorite movies.
Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yes, Frank Dukes.
The kumite, right?
Yes, yep, exactly. But that's about the extent of my fight.
I love it. That's great.
Relationship at this point, yeah.
A lot of fighters do yoga. A lot of older fighters and professional wrestlers as well do the yoga thing because it's just, it's all back and neck problems that they suffer from. And it's like the best thing for that kind of stuff and maintaining that, what do they call it, musculoskeletal stuff, Yeah, that's great. That's great. And again, I'm glad you took a women's self-defense class. I think everybody should take something like that at some point, but particularly women. And lots of jiu-jitsu schools and martial arts schools offer them, often low cost or free. So yeah, getting one of those situations just so you're equipped, worst case scenario. Bloodsport, man, what a hilarious movie, man. The cop, one of the cops after him is Forrest Whitaker.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, one of the guys chasing him is Forrest Whitaker, and yeah, it's just great. And he's just like out. It's like it becomes like a wacky it looks like a 1920s movie where like the guy's running away and he's like jumping over crazy shit. Then like he like waves at them, hey, you didn't catch me again. And that happens like several times in the movie.
Yes. Now I want to watch Bloodsport again.
No, I'm a big fan of him.
Yeah.
He's great. Did you ever watch that movie with him, JCVD? Jean-Claude Van Damme?
Yes.
What a cool fucking movie that was, where he plays himself. That was a really fun movie.
It was super cool.
I thought it was a really smart one. I think he's great.
Yes.
So we mentioned the Taylor Swift as book Instagram account, but as far as your stuff, your social media website and plugs, what do you got for us so we can direct people over to your book, your website, more of your writing?
Yeah. So I'm Danika S. LeMay, both Twitter and Instagram. I mostly use Instagram. I am going to say that. I like to try and get on Twitter once in a while, though. My website is danikastegmanlemay.com. And I have links to all my things on there. Some of my readings were online, and I have links to those, links to all my poems that you can find that are available online, and links to my YouTube videos. I've been doing some home video things. So it's all on the website.
Sweet. We will definitely put all the links in the show notes specifically those poems that you read for us that we can find online, and your recordings of your poems. We will make sure to share that far and wide. Danika,
Great, thank you.
I really enjoyed this. I was glad to get to know you a little bit. And yeah, I loved this project, and I truly enjoyed reading this little poetry collection. And yeah, I think you're doing some really interesting stuff. And I'm just thrilled that you were on here. So
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
all right. Well, you take care. All right.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Bye-bye. All right, y'all. Thanks for listening to that interview with Danika Stegeman LeMay. The book is called Pilot, and that's from Spork Press. There's going to be a link to buy that in the episode details and on the website. Danika has lots of stuff in the works, so you want to keep up with her. Go over to Instagram and Twitter at Danika S. LeMay. Instagram and Twitter, Danika S. LeMay. And there's more of her writing that you gotta read. You can get all of that through her website. That's gonna be danikastegmanlemay.com. And you know the deal for the show. Writers and fighters all over social media. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Give us a rating. Share an episode with a friend. Writersandfighters.com has an episode guide. Stay tuned next week. Episode 37. It's going to be a round two. Round two with Nate Jolly from episode 3 of the show. Nate Jolly, former NPC bodybuilder and former pro wrestler. Get to catch up with him, so stay tuned for that one. Aside from that, make sure to take care of each other, be good and be safe, and we'll talk next week.